Hey, welcome in. You're listening to the weekend edition of the Korelin Economics Report. I'm Al Korelin. Appreciate you joining me. Again, I want to welcome all of our new listeners at radio station KUIK in Portland, Oregon. One of the best conservative talk stations, in my opinion, on the West Coast. It's a good one. Starting out the show this week with Peter Schiff. Peter is a very, very interesting man. I met Peter in Las Vegas a couple of years ago at an event called the Freedom Fest. He is, I think, one of the most forward-looking, accurate thinkers that we have in the United States. He just published a new book. It's called The Real Crash. Pete, great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me on. You know, I actually do an online radio show myself called the Peter Schiff Show. Okay. And if it's not, in the area where people are listening, they can go online. I do it at schiffradio.com, 5 days a week from 10 a.m. to noon Eastern Time.
We do the same thing. Our show is not only on terrestrial radio. We expanded ourselves to the internet back in 2002. Funny story, the program director at a station that I was hosting a show of mine said, in 2001, 2002, he said, Al, we need to put this thing on the internet. I almost broke my ankle when I fell over. I was laughing so hard. We've got 160,000 people who listen to us on the internet now. It's just, technology is an amazing thing. Let's talk about your new book, Peter.
Well, my new book is basically, it's a follow-up to my original book, Crash Proof, which came out in 2007. Okay. And in that book, it was called How to Profit from the Coming Economic Collapse. And of course, I'm talking about an American economic collapse.
Sure, yeah.
And that book predicted the bursting of the housing bubble, the financial crisis and Great Recession that followed. But that wasn't the crash that I was warning people to prepare for. The crash that I was worried about was what was going to happen as a result of what the government would do about that Great Recession and about the collapse of the housing market.
And they haven't done anything yet.
No, they've done everything I feared they would do.
Oh, exactly. That's what I mean, yeah.
More stimulus, more quantitative easing, bailouts, money printing, all of that has set up for the real crash, which is coming, and that's why I wrote this book, so people will know that it's coming, but more importantly, know why.
Peter is preaching to the choir when it comes to Big Al. Peter, was interesting. I was back in Washington, D.C. About 2 weeks ago, chatting with some folks from Ron Paul's office, and I know that you know who Congressman Paul is. And I tell you, the pessimism that's emanating from some of those folks is absolutely, number one, it's very, very accurate in my opinion. But number two, it's staggering how pessimistic some of those folks are right now. And I agree with them, Pete.
Well, if you understand economics, you've got no choice. You've got to be pessimistic. The rest of them, they don't understand economics. Either they're Pollyanna, they're just burying their head in the sand. They think that all we need is some more deficit spending, just more consumption, and somehow that's going to solve the problem. All their solutions make it worse because government solutions are the problem. The stimulus is what's killing us.
Peter, how in God's name can printing more money solve any problem? How can it solve any problem long term?
Well, it doesn't. You paper them over. Although the politicians, though, you have to remember, when politicians are solving problems, it's their problem of getting reelected. That's the problem they're concerned with. They know that if they level with the American public and ask,
they're not going to get reelected,
exactly,
man.
Because the medicine that cures us is bitter, and nobody wants to ask a voter to swallow it. They'd rather give them something that tastes good but doesn't work, but it gets them elected.
It's funny. I was reading an article in Atlantic Monthly about Ben Bernanke, and it was an interesting article in the fact that it brought up the fact that everybody seems to really dislike the guy, okay? To say the least.
He's actually pretty popular if you look at the surveys among investors. In fact, I was at the Atlantic conference the week that magazine came out. They had Bernanke on the cover, and they said he was a hero. And you can see the debate. You can see the panel. It's on YouTube. I said he was the villain. I said, how could you honor the guy? He basically took the baton from the real architect of the crisis, his predecessor, Alan Greenspan, but that everything Bernanke had done both before Greenspan left and after has been wrong. He didn't save us for anything. It's like he lit the fire, and then they're giving him credit for putting it out, but he didn't even really put it out because
I hate to use the trite expression, but he's just kicking the can. He's making it easy for the United States to kick the can down the road. But I'll tell you, in my opinion, when that can stops, and it's going to stop sooner rather than later, I think you're going to see economic times and social upheaval in this country beyond imagination.
And look, the problem is the can is going to get so big, we'll break our foot if we try to kick it again. I mean, that's,
I totally agree.
And yes, I mean, Ben Bernanke, see, I mix him up now. Ben Bernanke, he is enabling this massive increase in government by financing it all, by keeping interest rates artificially low, but that's preventing the economy from restructuring, and it doesn't grow the economy, it grows the government at the expense of the economy.
I'm with you 100%. I have an interesting question for you. You know, I get asked almost every day on our blog, and certainly whenever we come to a show like this by listeners, you know, do you think the election in November is going to make any major difference from an economic standpoint? Are we going to, you know, stay the course that we're on right now? Which I want, you know, I'm on record as saying, you know, I'm sure Barack Obama is a decent individual, but boy, I sure don't like his agenda.
I don't know if I would just make that assumption, but let's give him the benefit of the doubt, right?
But I don't think either one of us, I don't think, like his agenda. But the question is, let's assume that Mitt Romney, who is more likely than not going to get the nomination, let's assume that he does, let's assume that he's elected. Is that going to make a big difference in your mind, Pete?
Well, not in heading off the crash. I think it happens either way. And, you know, is he going to be less bad than Obama? I'm pretty sure he will be less bad than Obama, but will he be less bad than Bush? I mean, I don't know. I mean, are we just going to dial back to Bush? Because Bush was pretty bad. And remember, Obama simply took the Bush agenda and expanded it and made it bigger.
After saying he wasn't going to do that.
Yeah, well, of course, it's the same thing Roosevelt did when he criticized Hoover.
Yeah.
So, you know, history repeats. But where I think we're better off with Romney is after the next crash, what we do about it. I think Romney has a better chance of maybe recognizing the mistakes, because I think Romney philosophically supports capitalism and free markets. He might not really understand it all that well, but I think he's on board with it. I think Obama doesn't like it. He's a socialist, and in his mind, if he thinks the free market is failing, he likes that because he expects it to fail, and it lays the foundation for him to grow government and reshape the country into some centrally planned, socialist utopia that lives in his fantasies. And so I think it's very dangerous to have him in office.
Oh, I agree 100%. I'll tell you something that I found really, really interesting is just recently I noticed that the former President Clinton came out and said, you know, totally refuted the fact that people are saying that Romney is not an effective businessman. He said, I think Mitt Romney, George Romney, there's a little play on words. He said, I think Mitt Romney is a brilliant businessman, direct quote. And number two, he said, you know, he's very qualified. And then he came out and said, you know, the next breath is, but I think the president is going to win re-election.
Yeah, well, this is basically Obama going after Romney for a job creation record at Bain Capital, as if Bain Capital was there to create jobs. It wasn't. It was to create profits for the shareholders.
Exactly.
But in doing that, they did create jobs in the economy, even if all Mitt Romney did was fire people. If he laid off people who were redundant, who were inefficient, what he did is he freed up that labor to be utilized in the market more effectively someplace else. Obama doesn't understand how capitalism works. But maybe, I think Romney needs to defend his record in a different way, because sometimes the best way to create jobs is to fire people.
Interesting point. I did not vote for Barack Obama, and my best friend in the world is a very liberal individual who felt that now President Obama was the savior of the world, for lack of better terms. And he asked me once, he said, well, why didn't you vote for President Obama? And I said, two reasons. Number one, I read his book, The Audacity of Hope. I didn't like what I read in that book. Point number two, he's not qualified. He's never, ever been in the private sector. He's really not qualified to be the President of the United States. Well, I think the last 4 years have shown that to be the case.
Yeah,
you got the final word, we got 30 seconds.
Well, look, I wish it had been Ron Paul that had that nomination, because there we might have actually had a chance to make a difference. But I'm hoping that maybe being on all these debates with Ron Paul and maybe seeing him on the campaign trail, maybe Ron Paul will have a President Romney's ear, and when it does hit the fan, maybe he'll turn to him for advice.
One would hope. Peter, always a pleasure. Thanks, man.
Thanks for having me on.